A Russian warship is currently patrolling the English Channel. Meanwhile, an audio recording has just exposed a NATO foreign minister discussing secrets with Lavrov. What about the 2-week ceasefire? It's already hanging by a thread. This isn't a forecast. This is what's happening this morning. For months, Britain has been issuing strong warnings about Russia's so-called shadow fleet, the network of sanctioned tankers quietly shipping Russian oil through European waters and funding the Kremlin's war machine while the West has turned a blind eye. Now, Keir Starmer's government has finally drawn a line in the sand. The British military has been authorized to inspect and detain these vessels in British waters. Strong words, bold policy. However, Reuters reported in late March that even after these announcements were made, dozens of sanctioned Russian vessels continued to sail through completely unchallenged. Then, this week, Moscow decided to make a point. The Russian frigate Admiral Grigorovich, a fully armed warship, openly escorted 2 sanctioned tankers, the Universal and the Enigma, right through the English Channel, in broad daylight, with the whole world watching. What was the Kremlin's response to British complaints? They called it protection against piracy. Consider what is actually happening here. Russia isn't just transporting oil, it's also sending a warship to protect the ships transporting that oil in waters just off the British coast. The Shadow Fleet has just become something else entirely. It's now being treated as a military asset, one that Moscow is now openly willing to defend. Starmer responded by highlighting what lies beneath those waters: undersea cables, gas pipelines, and the infrastructure that heats homes and carries 99% of the world's internet traffic. He warned Putin directly that any attempt to damage them would not be tolerated. But here's the uncomfortable question that nobody wants to answer. If Britain couldn't stop sanctioned tankers from sailing through its own waters before a warship arrived, what exactly has changed? Meanwhile, Zelenskyy is saying something that many people in Washington and Brussels are trying very hard to ignore. If Putin takes Donbass, he won't stop there. In a recent interview, Zelenskyy clearly stated that Kyiv does not believe the narrative about Moscow's limited goals. He also implied that Trump's team does not fully understand what the Kremlin actually wants. His warning was direct. If the West were to offer up a piece of Ukrainian land in exchange for a ceasefire, the price would only increase next time, because Putin doesn't interpret concessions as generosity. He reads them as weakness. In the Kremlin's logic, weakness is an invitation to push further. Zelenskyy named the cities Dnipro, Kharkiv. He did not speculate. He stated them as the next logical steps in a playbook that hasn't changed. What makes this more than just Ukrainian politics is that serious conversations about what a realistic peace deal might look like are happening in Western capitals right now. Some of those conversations involve territorial concessions. Zelenskyy is essentially putting a warning label on that entire approach, viewing it not as diplomacy, but as a detonator. Whether Western leaders are listening is a different question entirely. A 2-week ceasefire was announced between the US and Iran. For about 48 hours, people were cautiously optimistic. Then Iran's actual demands started to emerge. According to Reuters, Tehran isn't asking for a pause. It's asking for a transformation. Guaranteed protection from future US strikes. Compensation for damages already incurred. It also wants the easing, or even the outright lifting, of sanctions that have strangled its economy for years. Perhaps most significantly of all, it is seeking formal recognition of Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz. This last demand is worth considering for a moment. The Strait of Hormuz is the choke point through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes every day. Rather than using this ceasefire as a path to de-escalation, Iran is using it as leverage to lock in a completely new geopolitical reality. Israel has made it clear that it won't wait around to see how the negotiations go. Prime Minister Netanyahu explicitly stated that enriched uranium would be removed from Iran, either through an agreement or by force. He also confirmed that the ceasefire with Iran does not extend to Hezbollah, and that strikes will continue. So what does the ceasefire actually mean? On paper, it's a pause. In practice, however, both sides are poised to strike. They're just pausing to negotiate who gets to pull the trigger first. For years, Viktor Orban has based his political identity on one idea: Hungary first, Brussels never, and Moscow. Well, that's a different matter. This week, however, that carefully constructed image took 2 serious hits in the space of 48 hours. First, at a large opposition rally for Peter Magyar's Tisza party, Russian state media correspondents were spotted in the crowd. Magyar didn't ignore them. He called them out from the stage and welcomed them to experience free speech and regime change. The square then erupted with cries of, "Russians, go home! Russians, go home!" This chant has a particular significance in Hungary. It was the slogan of the 1956 uprising, when Hungarians rose up against Soviet occupation and were crushed by Russian tanks. Hearing it again in the streets of Budapest, directed at Russian journalists and Orbán himself, is significant. It signals what this election has actually become. Then came the second blow, which is potentially even more significant. An audio recording was published by investigators, allegedly capturing a conversation between the Hungarian foreign minister, Péter Szijjártó, and the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. In the recording, Szijjártó apparently offers to pass Ukraine's EU accession documents to Russia via the Hungarian embassy in Moscow. Reuters has confirmed that the recording exists. However, its authenticity has not been independently verified. But if it's real, it's no longer a matter of Budapest having a special position on Russia. We're talking about an EU foreign minister currently serving as a back channel for the Kremlin on one of the most sensitive issues in European politics, just days before a national election. Orbán has built his whole brand on defending Hungarian sovereignty. Hungarians are now asking, sovereignty from whom exactly? To conclude, let's look at two stories that may seem small, but are not. Armenia's Procyon brandy factory has just found itself at the center of a Russian court case. The charge? Spirits that don't match their declared composition. The timing was immediately after Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan publicly reminded Putin that Armenia has neither internet censorship nor restrictions on political speech. Russia's response was swift. Not military, not diplomatic, economic. It was a licensing challenge designed to hurt Armenian exports and send a message. This is how Moscow operates when it cannot win an argument. It reaches for the market, the inspectorate, or the surprise audit. Armenian cognac has effectively become a diplomatic hostage. Finally, one of Russia's long-standing state television propagandists, Viktor Olovich, has fled to Greece and is asking the US State Department for help. For years, he told Russian audiences that the West was Russophobic, hostile, and dangerous. Now he is in Athens contacting the very government he spent years demonizing, claiming that the FSB visited his home twice and made direct threats. The irony would be funny if it weren't so consistent. When real danger arrives in Russia, even the loudest voices of the Russian world apparently prefer the Greek islands and American consulates. Meanwhile, one of Putin's former allies has offered the most candid description of the Russian system in years. In an unguarded moment, Pavel Gubarev described Putin not as a dictator or a mastermind, but as a manager, a label on a structure, a program running inside a machine that would keep running even if the label changed. This one sentence explains more about why this war continues than any amount of battlefield analysis ever could. If Putin is merely a manager of a colonialist system, you cannot end the war by negotiating with him alone. You have to reckon with the system. A warship in the English Channel. A ceasefire, with fingers still on the triggers. An opposition square echoing the slogans of 1956. A propagandist fleeing to the enemy he created. And cognac caught in the middle of a geopolitical dispute. These aren't separate stories. They are all part of the same story. Of a world where the old rules are being tested, the old boundaries are being crossed, and the old assumptions are disintegrating faster than anyone is willing to acknowledge. Stay sharp. See you next time.